Welcome to the Happiness and Self-Worth Solution. In this video, we're going to talk about self-worth, and we're going to talk about it in a way that will allow you to go deep inside yourself to really think about, what do you believe about yourself? What do you feel about yourself? And what is it that you think you can and cannot do? And in order to get started, I'd like to ask you this question. Where does your happiness come from? I'm going to be showing you this pie chart, and this pie chart has 3 segments. There's a segment that represents 10%, 50%, and 40%. And my question to you is this: how much of your happiness comes from your circumstances? Is it the 10%? Is it the 50%? Or is it the 40%? If you're like most people, you would think that your happiness, 40% of it comes from your circumstances, because we spend so much time trying to change our circumstances in order to be happy. We're not happy in our jobs, so we want to change jobs. We're not happy in our marriage, so we want to change spouses. We're not happy where we live, so we want a new house, a new neighborhood, and we want to go somewhere new. We spend so much time trying to change our circumstances, but in reality, only about 10% of your happiness comes from your circumstances. The other 50% comes from your background, your programming, how you were raised, who raised you. And this background and programming becomes very powerful because it represents where we get our default responses to what happens to us. When we're rejected, how do we respond? When something great happens to us, how do we respond? Well, it's based on our default programming, and that default programming is very powerful. For example, I'd like you to think about a stop sign. Do you have a stop sign in your mind? Okay, what color is a stop sign? You're right, it's red. And how many sides does it have? It has 8 sides. Now I'd like you to think about a yield sign. How many sides does a yield sign have? If you said 3, you're right. Now let me ask you this: what color is a yield sign? If you're like most people, you will say yellow. In fact, when I do live presentations, everybody shouts out, "Yellow!" But that's the wrong answer. A yield sign is red and white. And yet we've been programmed to think that 3-sided traffic signs are yellow. How often does that represent your default response? That may be incorrect. That when something bad or something good happens to you, you respond by default based on your programming. And as I said, the programming is how you were raised, where you were raised, who raised you. Did they praise you or did they criticize you? The other 40% in this pie chart represents what you can control. And this 40% becomes really important because that's what we're going to focus on in the happiness and the self-worth solution. This 40% is so critical that when you learn the skills and the abilities that I'm going to share with you, that 40% can overtake some of your default programming so that really you can be happy regardless of what happens to you. In that 40% is something that I call emotional resourcefulness. Emotional resourcefulness is the energy, the skills, and the power that you draw upon to handle when life does not deliver you a golden ticket, as we talked about in the last video. To explain this, let me share this story with you. This story starts in the jungles of Africa. Who, in your mind, what animal, I would say, is king of the jungle in the jungles of Africa? It's the lion. So let's say that this is a story about Leo the lion. Leo gets up in the morning and he's not feeling really good. Let's say it's the middle of the week. It's already been a rough week at work, and he's just not feeling great. But in his heart, he knows that he's king of the jungle, and he sits in front of the mirror and he puts on his tie, or he gets dressed and he says, "Leo, yeah, you're king of the jungle." You know, really trying to boost himself up. He's not really feeling it, but he knows that he has to get to work, so he heads on his way to work and he goes out into the jungle to prove that he's king of the jungle. And he comes across a snake in the grass. And he comes up on the snake and he says, "Rawr! Who's king of the jungle?" And the snake perks up and says, "Oh, Leo, everybody knows you're king of the jungle." Leo says, "You better believe it, I am king of the jungle." And he goes on his merry way to work, and he comes across a tiger in the reeds. And he does the same thing. He sneaks up and he says, "Rawr! Who's king of the jungle?" And the tiger says, "Oh, Leo, 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 everybody knows you're king of the jungle." Leo says, "You better believe it." And so right now we think that Leo is an optimist. Leo is king of the jungle. But how easy is it to be positive when everybody's telling you the king? And I don't imagine that that happens to you very often, where everybody's saying you're king of your own jungle. Well, Leo continues on his way to work, and he spies in the distance a big bull elephant right by the watering hole. And he sneaks up on this big bull elephant, and he says, "Rawr! Who's king of the jungle?" And the elephant picks him up by his trunk, throws him into the ground, and stomps on him into the mud. And Leo is shaken up, and he gets up and he says, "Oh, you don't have to get mad because you don't know the answer." Now that's a funny way of saying that when life turns sour, when people step on us and put us into the mud, we can learn the skills that allow us to say, "Hey, you don't have to get mad because you don't know the answer." And it all starts with how you feel about yourself. And I call this emotional resourcefulness, which is a key element to learning about and feeling your self-worth.